Let's continue to think about this sense that Jesus, when he came and he really lived and he really died and he really rose from the dead, he really was fully human. He wasn't somehow some sort of superhuman or alternative reality. Jesus became fully man. And it's really important for us to understand that. And we've seen how being born of a virgin was both necessary and intentional on God's part. Understanding that Jesus came and was fully human, fully man, is really important to help us to understand more about who he is, but also how we can relate to God and how we can have a closer, more intimate relationship with God. It's important because we can start to realise that Jesus, living as a fully man, lived with our human weaknesses and human limitations. What do we mean by that? Well, I think the first thing for us to say is that living as fully man meant Jesus had a human body. Luke 2 and verse 40 says that the child grew and became strong. In other words, there was a human natural. He wasn't somehow transplanted as the fully grown 33-year-old God of the universe. He was born as a baby and was nurtured and cared for by a mother, and grew as a child, and knew what it was to be obedient. The Bible talks about him learning obedience to his parents. But he had a human body, and we see that if we look at Jesus meeting the woman at the well in John 4 and verse 6, we see that Jesus was tired. If we look at Jesus on the cross, we see that he was thirsty. John 19 verse 28. If we look at the encounter of Jesus in the wilderness, we see two things. We see firstly that he was hungry, but we also see that he became physically weak. And then in Luke 23, we see on the cross that Jesus actually died. In other words, Jesus being fully man, having a human body like you and me, meant that he was like us in every way. But what's really interesting is that when Jesus died and rose again, he had a new physical body. And we see, verses like Luke 24, verse 39, where a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. But actually Jesus was sitting, eating with his disciples, interacting with them. Jesus' body was transformed when he rose again. He had, in a sense, a perfect body without our sinful nature, without the flaws that we have, and gave us a picture of the sort of physical body we will have when we rise from the dead, when we spend eternity with God. Understanding that Jesus had a human body is to understand that Jesus became like us in every way. As well as having a human body, we see that Jesus also had a human mind. Luke 2 verse 52 talks about Jesus increasing in wisdom. There was a natural humanity about Jesus in the way that he developed, both physically but also mentally. He went through a learning process. And in Hebrews 5 verse 8, this takes this a stage further when it says that he learned obedience even to his parents. Now there's a challenge for many of us who've got children. But to think that Jesus, the God who created the universe, chose to limit himself to having a human mind is another indication of just how much like us he became. As well as having a physical body and a human mind, a physical mind, Jesus also had a human soul and emotions. In John 12 verse 27, we see that Jesus says that my soul is troubled even to the point of death. And looking at the original language behind that, I'm told that the root word behind that is the same Greek word that you get anxiety from. Jesus experienced anxiety on his way to the cross in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus was troubled in spirit, sorrowful. But he also, we see that he marvelled at the centurion in Matthew 8, and he wept at the grave of Lazarus in John 11. Jesus had a human soul and a human emotions. It's just another indication of his humanity. It's really important and helpful for us to realise that Jesus was fully man, because sometimes we can think of Jesus as being something else. It's possible to think of us that because Jesus was God, somehow he was different to us. But when we start to look at what the Bible teaches us, we see that Jesus was like us in every way. So why is it really important for us to realise that Jesus was like us in every way? Hebrews 4:15 is a good clue for this, because depending which version you read, one version says we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathise with us in our weaknesses, or as the New Living Translation says, this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he didn't sin. This is really helpful and really important for us, because it's one of the things that makes Christianity different to every other religion. Because we talk about Emmanuel, God with us. We sing it at Christmas. But God is with us, but he also became one of us, which sets him apart from every other religion that would somehow show a God who was distant, who we're having to try to earn some form of acceptance. The difference with us is that God stepped into our world in order to redeem us. He fully identified with us, so that when we live in a relationship with him, we know that we come to a God who understands. The next time you're struggling, why don't you pause and reflect on the life of Jesus? We looked at that verse that said in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus felt anxiety. The next time you're anxious, know that Jesus went through what you did. The next time you're hungry, remember Jesus got hungry. The next time someone mistreats you, understand that Jesus was mistreated. God became fully man to identify with us, that when we have a relationship with God, we're not worshipping a God who's far away, but a God who understands, because he walked a mile in our moccasins, as the saying says. He came and lived a life like you and me. How incredible is that for our relationship with God, that we can come to a God who understands our weaknesses because he's faced the very things that we face.